quorum call be vitiated?
Senate's not in a quorum call. Senator is recognized.
In that case, it doesn't have to be vitiated. Mr. President, we are at a pivotal moment. If the Congress does not get its act together by tomorrow, there will be a government shutdown. A government shutdown will be extraordinarily destructive to the people of our country, millions of whom depend upon government services. It will be destructive to millions of federal employees who keep their families going with a paycheck from the government. It will be destructive to the United States Armed Forces, men and women who put their lives on the line to defend us. So it seems to me that we have got to do everything that we can to prevent a government shutdown. Now, as everybody knows, we have a Republican Party which controls the United States Senate, Republican Party which controls the U.S. House of Representatives, and a Republican who is in the White House, President Trump. We are now 3.5 months into the fiscal year, and yet the Republican Party has yet to give us an annual budget. The United States government is a $3 trillion operation. There is no business in this country of any size that can run week to week, month to month. We need an annual budget, and now the Republicans are coming back asking for a fourth continuing resolution. You cannot run a government like that. It is unfair to the American people, unfair to the armed forces, unfair to all of us. 3.5 months have gone in the fiscal year, and yet the Children's Health Insurance Program has not been reauthorized. This is a program that has existed for decades with bipartisan support. How can we not reauthorize the CHIP program? 3.5 months in the fiscal year have come and gone. We have not reauthorized the Community Health Center program, which provides primary health care, dental care, mental health counseling, low-cost prescription drugs to 27 million Americans in every state in this country. Mr. President, if legislation were brought to the floor of the Senate today, the Blunt-Stabenow bill reauthorizing the Community Health Center, I suspect it would get 70, 75 votes. And yet, Republicans, after 3.5 months, have not been able to reauthorize CHIP program or the Community Health Center program. Mr. President, when we talk about the budget process, we are talking about three major issues. There are more, but there are three major issues. Number one, will we continue to have parity in spending between defense spending and non-defense spending? Since 2011, in 4 different budgets, there has been a bipartisan agreement that for every dollar you spend on defense is a dollar you will spend on the needs of a struggling middle class, millions of people who are struggling every day to keep their heads above water economically. A dollar here, a dollar there. That has been agreed upon on 4 separate occasions. But several weeks ago, the Republican leader, Senator McConnell, came to the floor and said, we want to do away with that parity. We want to be able to spend more on the military and less on the needs of working families. Mr. President, we have a middle class which is shrinking. We have people all over this country working 2 or 3 jobs. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. We got millions of elderly people who cannot make it on $12,000, $13,000 a year Social Security. We got an opioid crisis sweeping the nation, hitting my state of Vermont very, very hard. We have an infrastructure which is crumbling. We cannot ignore the needs of the working families of this country and only spend a huge amount of money on the military. So one of the things we have to do as we come together, as we must, for a bipartisan agreement is, of course, reauthorize CHIP, but of course reauthorize the Community Health Center program. Stabenow, blunt bill, has 9 Republican co-sponsors. Every Democrat will support it. We have the votes. Let's do it. We have to deal with the pension issue, Mr. President. 1.5 million American workers are about to lose 50-60% of the pensions they were promised by the United States government. Cannot be allowed to happen. We have to stand with those workers. Mr. President, I went to a meeting just earlier today dealing with the Social Security Administration. Social Security Administration, which provides, is the process, the administrative arm that makes sure that the elderly and the disabled and people who get Social Security benefits get those benefits in a timely manner. For years now, Republicans have underfunded that administration. And today there are simply not enough employees to do the work that has to be done. And now, amazingly enough, over in the House, they're talking about massive cuts to the Social Security Administration on top of all the cuts that they have already received. Washington Post wrote an article a few weeks ago, unbelievable. And what they said is that over the last year, if you can believe it, 10,000 people with disabilities who had applied for Social Security benefits died while waiting for those benefits, while waiting for those claims to be processed. And they were not processed in a timely manner because the Social Security Administration does not have the workers that it needs and has been significantly underfunded. For the sake of the senior citizens of our country, for the sake of the disabled, any budget agreement, when we have parity, must supply sufficient amounts of money for the Social Security Administration so that they can do their work. You know, Mr. President, every Veterans Day, every member of this body talks about how much they love veterans. Veterans Administration today has 30,000 vacancies, which mean that our veterans are not getting the quality and timely care that they must be able to receive. We have got to start filling those vacancies. Any budget agreement must include increased funding for the VA. Mr. President, in my state of Vermont and all over this country, there are millions of young people who went to college, went to graduate school, and have left school deeply in debt. And because of high interest rates, some of those now people owe more money today after paying off year after year their debt than they did when they took out the debt. We have got to address the debt crisis facing some 40 million Americans. In Vermont and again all over this country, if you're a working person, what do you do if you have a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old? Well, you look for decent quality childcare, but all over this country it is extremely difficult to find that quality childcare. Any serious budget agreement that we reach must include increased funding for childcare so that working people in this country know that when they leave their kid at a center, that child will receive quality care at a cost that is affordable. Every dollar we invest in early childhood education is a dollar very, very well spent. Mr. President, all over this country, in this, the most wealthy nation in the history of the world, we have an infrastructure, roads and bridges, water systems, wastewater plants that are crumbling. In many parts of rural America, including the state of Vermont, we do not have high-quality, affordable broadband or cell phone service. How do you maintain a community? How do you bring business into a community? How do kids do their homework if you don't have decent broadband or cell phone service? We have got to invest in rural America and make certain that every community in this country has broadband and has the kind of infrastructure that it needs in order to prosper. Mr. President, one of the tragedies taking place in this country today and resulting unbelievably in a lowered life expectancy rate here in the United States of America. Our life expectancy rate is actually in decline. And one of the reasons for that is the tragic opioid and heroin epidemic, which claimed some 60,000 lives last year. We cannot ignore that problem. We've got to invest in prevention. We've got to invest in treatment. We've got to help states all over this country and families who are struggling with this issue. My point is, Mr. President, we need parity not for some abstract inside the Beltway reason. We need parity in spending because we need more in this country than just a strong military. We need a strong middle class. We need a strong working class. We cannot turn our backs on tens of millions of people who are struggling. And the second issue that we have got to deal with here in the Congress is the issue of DACA and the need for a clean dreamers legislation. In September, President Trump initiated a very serious crisis. And what he did is rescinded President Obama's executive order providing legal status through DACA to 800,000 young people. These are young people who were raised in the United States of America. These are young people who today are working. They are in school. They are in the military. This is the only home they have ever known. This is the only country that any of them or many of them can even remember. The idea of simply doing away with the legal status that they have, subjecting them to deportation, subjecting them to being taken away from their only country they have ever known and loved, is literally beyond comprehension and unspeakable. In September, when Trump initiated this process by rescinding Obama's executive order on DACA, he said to the Congress, Republican leadership in the House and Senate, you fix it. Get legislation done. Well, there are people right now, Senator Durbin, Senator Graham, many others, who are working on legislation. Doesn't go as far as I would like it to go, but on serious legislation in the House. You have the vast majority of Democrats and many Republicans who understand we cannot turn our backs on these young people. But that's not just what we feel here in the House and the Senate. It is what the American people want. Poll after poll after poll shows that 70, 75%, 80% of the American people say provide these 800,000 young people with legal status, provide them with a path toward citizenship. Very few people think that we should turn our backs on these young people, let DACA expire, and subject them to deportation. Let us do what the American people want us to do, and let us pass a strong Dreamers Act. And last but not least, we had some terrible hurricanes some months ago and brought a lot of disaster to Texas, to Florida, to Puerto Rico, and to the Virgin Islands. Months have gone by, and we have yet to pass the kind of disaster relief that communities in those states and territories desperately need. Mr. President, we cannot continue to kick the can down the road. We cannot continue to run a $3 trillion government on a month-by-month basis, unfair to everybody. We have got to sit down and negotiate a serious budget agreement. And what Republicans must understand is, yes, they have a 51-49 majority here in the Senate, but you need 60 votes to pass this type of legislation. You need 60 votes. That means you cannot do it alone. You cannot give the Democratic caucus a fait accompli and expect Democrats to say, oh, yes, sir, we're going to follow you. This requires bipartisan discussion. Bipartisan discussion on the parity issue and domestic spending. Bipartisan discussion on DACA. We have a strong majority of members of the Senate who support a dreamer's piece of legislation and a path toward citizenship. We have a strong majority of the American people and a strong majority of members of the Senate who support disaster relief. This should not be a difficult problem. The American people want a resolution. They want it done in a bipartisan way. Let's do it. Let's not kick the can down the road. Republicans must understand that they must negotiate in a bipartisan way. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.